Albus Percival Wulfric, Brian Dumbledore was born to Kendra and Percival Dumbledore in the summer of 1881, in the mainly wizarding village of Mold-on-the-Wold. The early years of Dumbledore's life were marked by tragedy when his younger sister Ariana Dumbledore was attacked by a group of Muggle boys who saw her performing magic and were frightened by what they saw. Ariana was left mentally and emotionally scarred by the event, and her magical powers were left severely altered and would manifest themselves on rare occasions, usually in random or destructive ways. Albus's father, Percival Dumbledore, was heartbroken and set out in search of his own brand of justice. He located the Muggle boys and attacked them, as they had his daughter. For this, Percival was sentenced to Azkaban, where he later died, choosing the sentence over explaining why he had attacked the boys, as it would have meant Ariana being taken away. To escape the accusing eyes of the local community, Kendra Dumbledore moved her young family to the village of Godric's Hollow, which, like Mold-on-the-Wold, was a part wizarding village. Fearing, like her husband, that the ousting of her daughter's inability to control her magical ability would see her confined indefinitely to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, Kendra rebuffed all her neighbors, with the eventual exception of Bathilda Bagshot, preferring to be left alone, and Albus learned not to mention his sister or father in public. Dumbledore began attending Hogwarts in the autumn of 1893, and was sorted into Gryffindor House. Dumbledore's first year was met with much whispering about his father's crime. Many of Albus's fellow students mistakenly believed that, like father like son, Albus too hated Muggles. Some praised his father's actions, hoping to gain his trust, but they would not find favor with the young Dumbledore this way. Though later in his young life, under the influence of his love for Gellert Grindelwald, some anti-Muggle prejudice did develop, but he soon saw the error of his intent. He befriended a young Elphius Doge on his first day at Hogwarts. Doge was suffering from the aftermath of dragonpox at the time, greenish skin and pockmarks, which discouraged most from approaching him. Dumbledore, however, demonstrated his uncommon kindness and willingness to look past the surface and find inner beauty in people. In his third year, Dumbledore presumably took study of ancient runes and at least one other subject, which was known not to be divination. During his fourth year, he accidentally set the bed curtains in his dormitory on fire, although he admitted that he had never liked them anyway. And, being the single most outstanding student in the school at the time, was made both a prefect during his fifth year and head boy in his seventh. As an exceptionally gifted student of prodigious talents, Albus's aptitude for magical learning was such that he would eventually grow up to become arguably the greatest wizard of his day through largely his own efforts. He was noted to have had access to various highly accomplished teachers in his youth, who each would have played a part in nurturing his magical skills and helping him reach his full potential. Indeed, at some point over the course of his school career, Albus even won the Barnabas Finkley Prize for exceptional spellcasting, became the British youth representative to the Wizengamot, and received the gold medal for groundbreaking contribution to the International Alchemical Conference in Cairo, and considered by some to have been the most brilliant student to have ever attended the school. In addition, Dumbledore also became very well connected during his Hogwarts years, making notable friends such as Nicholas Flamel, Bathilda Bagshot, and Griselda Marchbanks, who marked him in his Enneads for charms and transfiguration, and later recalled that he did things with a wand that she had never seen before. He also had several of his papers published during his studies and exchanged letters with theoretician Adalbert Waffling. During his time at Hogwarts, he had also discovered the Spore Scrolls, a collection of scrolls hidden by Headmistress Philetta Spore, detailing the creation of the magical enhancer, a fungus which could amplify magical abilities. Fearful of how the wizarding would react to such knowledge, He believed its current hiding place wasn't suitable enough and stole the box containing the Spore Scrolls and hid it in the Forbidden Forest. After graduating from Hogwarts in June 1899, Dumbledore planned to take the traditional grand tour of the world with his friend Doge. However, tragedy ensued on the eve of the departure when Kendra Dumbledore was killed by an outburst of Ariana's uncontrollable magic, leaving Albus the head of his own broken family and now in charge of his younger siblings. Albus returned to Godric's Hollow full of bitter resentment at his situation, feeling trapped and wasted, although he refused to let Aberforth quit school and insisted he complete his education first before taking care of Ariana. Fortune finally appeared to shine on Dumbledore, however, when a foreigner arrived at their little village by the name of Gellert Grindelwald. This summer Gellert and I fell in love. My brother fell in love as well, with a girl from the Hollow. She was sent away. There were rumors about a child. He's Dumbledore. If I had been a better friend to Aberforth, if I had been a better brother, he might have confided in me. Perhaps things would have been different. This boy could have been part of our lives, part of our family. Albus Dumbledore, telling Newt about his nephew's rumored birth. In the summer of 1899, Albus was introduced to Gellert by his great-aunt Bathilda Bagshot. After a day of knowing each other, they quickly struck up a close friendship. The two of them spent days together, sharing ideas and talking, and building their relationship. They learned a lot about each other, and even shared the same inspirations and what they wanted to spend their lives doing. One night, Albus sent a letter by owl to Gellert in the dead of night. A young man around Albus's age, he lived for the next 2 months with his great-aunt, the celebrated magical historian and family friend of the Dumbledores, Bathilda Bagshot, who introduced the two soon after Grindelwald crossed her doorstep. Thrilled to realize that the newcomer was every bit as brilliant as himself, the two young men took to each other right away and quickly struck up a close friendship, unified by the revelation of Grindelwald's research into the existence and whereabouts of the fabled Deathly Hallows. Dumbledore also quickly became fascinated by Grindelwald's ideas of wizarding domination, obviously considering Grindelwald an unexpected new chance to show his own brilliance and come out of the local misery. Over the course of the 2 months Grindelwald stayed in Godric's Hollow, the two young men's friendship became romantic, with Albus ignoring any misgivings he had about Gellert's dark intents by convincing himself the revolution they were planning to embark on was truly for the greater good, and that any harm caused would be repaid 1,000-fold after its conclusion. One night, Albus and Gellert walked to a barn in which they went inside with plans to create a blood pact together, forming a love bond that could only be broken if their spells met without intent to attack one another. Sometime between Albus and Gellert's relationship, Aberforth fell in love also with a girl from Godric's Hollow, and their relationship led to her becoming pregnant with Aberforth's child. However, the girl was sent away, presumably by her family, and Aberforth wouldn't see his son again for over 30 years. Albus was aware of rumors that there was a child from the relationship, but he never knew for sure, as the distance between the brothers resulted in Aberforth not confiding in or seeking Albus's help with the situation. Gellert and I had made plans to go away together. My brother didn't approve. One night he confronted us. Voices were raised, threats made. Aberforth drew his wand, which was foolish. I drew my wand, which was even more foolish. Gellert just laughed. No one heard Ariana coming down the stairs. Can't say for certain. It was my spell. Doesn't really matter. 1 minute she was there, and the next she was gone. Albus Dumbledore, recalling the duel to Newt S. near the end of the summer, after Albus and Gellert both completely knew and agreed upon everything. With their blood pact in hand, they had plans to start a global wizarding war, and to force Muggles into subservience. with full intent on becoming the great leaders of the revolution. Aberforth knew he had to stay behind for his sister Ariana. With his brother about to leave, Aberforth had to stop him and young Grindelwald from leaving him and their sister. He confronted them one night and was told that he was a stupid little boy by Gellert for doing so. After Aberforth and Gellert yelled and made countless threats, Aberforth drew his wand but was tortured by Gellert, though he laughed. Albus realized then how horrible a person Grindelwald truly was, and stepped in to defend his younger brother, and a three-way duel broke out between Gellert Grindelwald, Albus Dumbledore, and Aberforth Dumbledore. Ariana Dumbledore ran down the stairs to see what was happening and to try to help the ruckus, but did not know what she was doing, and was inadvertently killed by one of the teenager's stray spells. Gellert retreated quickly to his great-aunt's cottage, where he had her make him a portkey to take him back home. Albus and Aberforth both rushed towards their sister's body and cried in regret and pity. Soon after, they held a funeral for Ariana, at which Aberforth broke Albus's nose out of pure anger and sadness at what he had done. Shortly thereafter, Albus, who had been exchanging owls with the famous researcher as far back when he had been a student at Hogwarts, traveled to France and spent some time in Paris studying the ancient art and science of alchemy under the tutelage of Nicholas Flamel. He presumably did so in order to both give his brother some space, as well as to get away for a bit and spend his time grieving more productively than he otherwise would have done simply wallowing in his own misery. It is unknown when exactly he returned to Britain, but around the time he did, Albus had become intrigued with the study of dragon's blood, and was ultimately credited with the discovery of no less than 12 new uses for it, even though a wizard by the name of Eva Dillensby would later claim that he had already discovered 8 of them when Dumbledore borrowed his notes, an accomplishment that earned him widespread recognition and ultimately played no small role in the subsequent offer he received of a teaching position at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Having always had a deep fondness for the old school and felt drawn towards teaching even as a student, Albus was happy to accept. At some point after this, he had the unfortunate experience of tasting a vomit-flavored Bertie Bott's every flavor bean, as a result of which he lost his liking for the sweets. And so it was that Albus Dumbledore returned to Hogwarts Castle, not to learn this time, but to teach. Burdened by the secret knowledge of Grindelwald's imminent rise to power and wanting to rectify past mistakes, it was natural, perhaps, that he felt drawn towards the job of defense against the dark arts instructor, a position in which he could most easily prepare his charges for the dangers he knew one day would come. Albus, who would henceforth come to be known to successive generations of students as Professor Dumbledore, was granted Classroom 3C on the 3rd floor and an office. Around the same time, the bookish young educator also procured and read a copy of the predictions of Tycho Dodonis. At some point early on in his teaching career, Albus became aware of the existence of an ancient magical artifact of unknown origin within the school, a looking glass with a grim history that was far more revealing than most, having once been kept out in the open where hundreds of people could discover the apparent delights of the Mirror of Erased. It had since been given a new home after a large number of them had become so entranced by what they had seen as to waste away before it. Some had reportedly even gone mad, not knowing if what it showed them was real or even possible. He eventually found it, however, safely tucked away in a hidden room on the uppermost floor of the castle that would only reveal itself to someone if they were in great need of it. The device, however, which upon closer examination turned out to have been bewitched with the tantalizing power of showing those who stared into its surface a vision of their heart's deepest desire, proved interesting rather than useful. Intrigued by the mirror as a fascinating piece of magical ingenuity, Albus was nevertheless painfully aware that his greatest yearning at the time was for something impossible, and that clinging on to a wish that could never, and for obvious reasons ought never, to be fulfilled, could only hurt him. Dumbledore eventually decided to leave the mirror where it was, covered by a curtain of black velvet. It would take many years before he went to visit it again. Even though the freshly hired instructor would henceforth largely busy himself with the training of young witches and wizards, Albus would continue to keep in touch with Nicholas Flamel, alongside whom he would eventually achieve a number of advancements in the field of alchemy over the years. As their relationship blossomed from that of student and mentor to that of an equal partnership and near lifelong friendship. At some point after this, Albus would visit his old friend and pose for a photograph in Flamel's workshop alongside his celebrated mentor, with many of his alchemical tools and equipment being visible in the background, as well as crystal ball and a book with a phoenix on the cover. In the 1910s, Dumbledore taught Hufflepuff Newton Scamander and Slytherin Leta Lestrange. One of his lessons involved confronting a boggart and learning the spell to banish it. When Newt's boggart turned into a desk, Dumbledore commented on its unexpected nature and kindly inquired why it took this form. Newt confessed that his greatest fear was being stuck working in an office. After Newt successfully dispatched the boggart, Dumbledore encouraged Leta to take her turn, reassuring her that being afraid of something wasn't shameful. Everyone was afraid of something. The form of Leta's boggart surprised both Dumbledore and the entire class. A white sheet containing an undistinguishable slight form floating through a dark blue glow. The event badly shook Leta. In 1913, one of Leta's experiments with a jarvey went too far, endangering the life of another student. Newt decided to take the blame and was sentenced to expulsion. Dumbledore, however, argued strongly on his behalf. Whether Newt's expulsion was enforced or not is unknown, but Dumbledore succeeded in at least allowing Newt to keep his wand. During his time at Hogwarts, Dumbledore also developed close relationships and friendships with wizards and witches throughout the world. Among these friends, he counted the French alchemist Nicholas Flamel and Ilver Morny Charms, Professor Eulalie Hicks. He maintained close contact with these friends in the form of enchanted books they all possessed, which allowed them to speak, despite the distance. The British Ministry of Magic, which was already suspicious of Dumbledore because of his past connection to Grindelwald, was wary of these relationships, believing that he used these contacts as spies to allow him to act as an independent authority to theirs, and maintained a close watch on Dumbledore and his allies. Chief among Dumbledore's rivals within the ministry was Torquil Travers, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, who never tried to hide his dislike for the Hogwarts teacher. Throughout the early days of the Global Wizarding War, a series of devastating attacks was perpetrated by Gellert Grindelwald and his cadre of followers across Europe, and rumors began circulating that his former friend had procured a wand of immense power, which Albus, who was privy to the aspiring revolutionary's quest for the Deathly Hallows, understood to mean that he had successfully obtained the Elder Wand. Sometime afterwards, word reached Albus through his extensive contacts that Grindelwald had had another vision. He had seen a powerful Obscurus kill the man he feared above all else, and even though the pact they had made all those years ago, not to fight one another, had ultimately worked in Grindelwald's favor by effectively preventing Albus from coming after him, it was clear that he still harbored fears that Dumbledore might still find a way to overcome it and move against him, only too aware that he was quite possibly the only wizard alive capable of bringing a definitive end to Grindelwald's reign of terror. However, Dumbledore continued to monitor and to try to anticipate Grindelwald's activities in the hopes of intercepting the attempted recruitment of the Obscurus. It was only years later, around December of 1926, that Dumbledore's patient monitoring of Grindelwald's movements through second-hand accounts paid off, When he heard about the series of magical disturbances that were causing severe devastation throughout the city of New York that risked the exposure of the wizarding world, having correctly guessed that the mysterious attacks to be the work of a powerful obscurial, and forever mindful of the fact that if he could figure out where the prophesied entity was located, so could Grindelwald. Hence, Albus decided to arrange for his plans to be thwarted. To this end, he contacted his old student Newt Scamander, who had become a magizoologist in the employment of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures at the Ministry of Magic in London, and had been traveling throughout the world locating and rescuing magical creatures from his fellow wizards, whether it was because they were greedy poachers seeking to profit off of them, or otherwise targeted them for the perceived threat they posed to the statute of secrecy. Dumbledore told Newt of the Thunderbird that was being held captive in Egypt, knowing he would not stand for such an injustice, and would not only rescue him, but also return him to his native Arizona. To accomplish this, Newt would have to pass through the Muggle customs in New York, where his visit would co-concur with both the obscurial attacks and Grindelwald's scheme to locate, identify, and ally himself with the culprit. Trusting Newt to do the right thing and protect the obscurial from Grindelwald, it turned out that his confidence in Newt's character and ability was well placed. Newt's involvement resulted not only in the discovery of Credence Barebone, the most powerful Obscurious ever recorded, the only one to survive into adulthood, but also in the capture of Grindelwald, who had been disguised as a high-ranking official at MAC-USA by the name of Percival Graves, to find the Obscurious. While there, however, Newt got in trouble when a number of the magical creatures in his case escaped, and ran loose in areas of the city inhabited mainly by non-magical people. For his role in the incident in New York, as well as his reluctance and evasiveness in providing his superiors at the ministry details about why he had been in New York in the first place, Newt was banned from traveling internationally by the ministry, a ban they offered to lift if he confessed that Dumbledore had been the one to send him to New York. Although he realized that Dumbledore had covertly sent him to New York, Newt remained loyal to his old teacher and refused to confess his role in the affair, even in later years when the rumors were published by Rita Skeeter in a biography of Newt called Man or Monster. The truth about Newt Scamander, he continued to deny that Dumbledore was responsible for his trip to New York in the foreword of a new edition of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. In the same year, Dumbledore became a regular columnist for Transfiguration Today, with the Daily Prophet quoting him as saying he was enraptured to be writing for the magazine. In 1927, when Grindelwald had escaped, Dumbledore, knowing that he would not be able to fight him due to their blood pact, met with Newt in London to ask him for help. He sent his former student to Paris to find Credence Barebone, who had survived his supposed destruction in New York. Albus told Newt who it was thought that Credence's true identity was. He then gave Scamander a card which directed straight to a safe house in Paris, where he could go if he needed to hide for a time. The rumors of Newt's potential travel to France reached the British Ministry of Magic, and a delegation of Aurors, including Newt's brother Theseus Scamander and Torquil Travers, was sent to Hogwarts Castle to question Dumbledore. Travers demanded that Dumbledore fight Grindelwald for him, but Albus refused, which angered Travers to the point that he cuffed Dumbledore into admonitors and forbade him from ever teaching defense against the dark arts again. Dumbledore turned to Theseus, who was last in leaving the classroom, and warned him that if he'd ever trusted him, he should not let Travers send him to Grindelwald's rally. Moments later, in one of the classrooms, he met Leta Lestrange, who was also in the delegation, but had separated herself from the group of Aurors. Leta accused Albus of being the only one who did not consider her bad in her youth, and stated that he was wrong about this. Dumbledore mentioned that rumors about her brother Corvus Lestrange, who was now believed to be Credence Barebone, must have been painful for her, which angered the witch, who interrupted his statement and added that he could not understand her, because he did not lose his brother. Dumbledore only replied that years ago he lost his sister, Ariana. Ending the conversation, Albus advised her to get rid of regret because it was his inseparable companion since the death of his sister. One night, Dumbledore went to the Room of Requirement, where the Mirror of Erised was stored. At first, to his joy, he saw an old memory he still valued of himself and Grindelwald from the time when their friendship was at its peak, that led to them sealing their bond with a blood pact in a barn, swearing to never fight each other. Dumbledore also saw Grindelwald himself from the present. Albus was longing for this meeting, while at the same time being very afraid of it, because he knew that he was the only person who could stop Grindelwald, and he could face the truth about who Ariana's killer was. After the Battle of the Lestrange family mausoleum, Dumbledore was waiting for Newt at Hogwarts. Albus expressed his sadness over Leta's death at Grindelwald's hands. Then the Magizoologist gave him an object stolen by Teddy. It was the pendant of his former teacher's blood pact with Grindelwald, leaving Albus to ponder if he could destroy it, which would allow him to finally participate in the war and defeat the Dark Wizard once and for all. Dumbledore asked Newt if his Niffler Teddy would like a cup of tea, and they went off to talk about what must be done. Reunion with Grindelwald. 9. Gellert, would this be one of your regular haunts? Albus, I don't have any regular haunts, Gellert. Let me see it. Sometimes I imagine I can still feel it around my neck. I carried it for so many years. How does it feel around yours? Albus, we can free each other of it. Gellert, love to chatter, don't they, our muggle friends? Though one must admit, they make a good cup of tea. Albus, what you're doing is madness. Gellert, it's what we said we'd do. Albus, well, I was young. I was Gellert, committed to me. To us. Albus, no. I went along because, Gellert. Because, Albus, because I was in love with you. Gellert, yes, but that's not why you went along. It was you who said we could reshape the world, that it was our birthright. Can you smell it? The stench. Do you really intend to turn your back on your own kind? For these animals, with or without you, I'll burn down their world, Albus. There's nothing you can do to stop me. Enjoy your cup of tea. Gellert and Albus's conversation at this meeting. Sometime in between 1927 and 1932, Albus planned to meet with his past boyfriend Gellert Grindelwald. Albus took a train to the London Underground and up to Piccadilly Circus and pondered before walking off to a London cafe to have a meeting with his former partner Gellert Grindelwald. He ordered a cup of tea for himself and informed the waitress that he was waiting for somebody who was Gellert Grindelwald. Gellert came late to this meeting. The two distant lovers discussed their common past and goals. Albus claimed to only have followed Gellert due to being in love. Grindelwald expressed his distaste for the Muggles present and informed Dumbledore of his intention to destroy their world, with or without Dumbledore's help, but he did acknowledge that they knew how to brew a good cup of tea. Forming his first army, knowing the dangers of Gellert Grindelwald were growing, Albus enlisted Newton Scamander to assemble an army filled with intrepid wizardkind, while also trying to figure out a way to destroy the blood pact created by his lover and him in their youth. Albus came to the Hogshead Inn to meet with Newt Scamander and Theseus Scamander. In one of the rooms, he demonstrated to the Scamander brothers that his blood pact was not only preventing him from attacking Grindelwald, but also was preventing him from thinking of attacking Gellert. After the thought of attacking Grindelwald flashed through his mind, the blood pact vial shot up and began to tear into the wall. Then the chain it was hanging from was wrapped around Albus's wrists, deeply injuring him. If Albus hadn't pushed the forbidden thought out of his head, the chain would continue to hurt him until he would eventually die of his wounds. Dumbledore stopped his demonstration and the chain loosened. He also told Theseus that he had to trust him. Albus explained to the Scamander brothers that the Qilin that Grindelwald stole had some special abilities, and because of them, Gellert could saw visions of the future, so the brothers had to be very careful. Before departing to Berlin, Dumbledore had given each of his army something to confuse Grindelwald, as they had to compensate for his ability to see the future. Newt gave them all the items Albus had entrusted to them. Theseus got a tie with a large gold pin. Jacob got a serpentine wand, but with no core, so it had no power. Bunty was given a list of instructions that only she could see. In the instructions, Dumbledore ordered her to make some copies of Newt's suitcase. After reading them, the instructions fell apart. Yusuf was ordered to go to Nurmengard and spy on Grindelwald, while Lally already had the portkey book. Later, Dumbledore arrived in Berlin himself, where he met with Newt, Lally, and Jacob. Albus asked Lally and Jacob to go to the candidates' dinner, as he suspected that there will be some kind of assassination attempt. Dumbledore also revealed to Newt the location of the mysterious German wizarding prison, Erkstag, where Theseus was being imprisoned. Sometime after, he found Aurelius Dumbledore in Berlin on a street. Credence released his Obscurus and started the fight. Albus successfully defended himself, but Credence's condition did not allow him to win this fight. Dumbledore assured Credence that Grindelwald had lied to him, and that they were not brothers, but told him that they do share the same, and he is a Dumbledore. After Newt put together his team of his chosen wizards, Albus invited them to Hogwarts, and while in the Great Hall showed them a sculpture of where they were heading. The destination of their journey was Bhutan. The Walk of the Qilin was to be held there, and a new Supreme Mugwump was to be elected. Dumbledore invited his crew to dinner at Hog's Head, where Aberforth prepared a meal for them. Albus explained to Aberforth that Credence was the son of Aberforth, the fruit of a relationship with a girl from Godric's Hollow. It turned out that Newt had overheard their conversation. After Aberforth left the room, Albus told Newt the truth about Credence, and that the boy was dying and could not be saved. He also revealed that his sister, Ariana, was an Obscurial like Credence, and that she died as a result of a fight between him, Aberforth, and Grindelwald. Newt tried to cheer Albus, but to no avail, as Albus blamed himself for his sister's death. Later, Dumbledore waited with Bunty for Newt, Theseus, Jacob, and Lally in the room of Recombe. There were 5 identical suitcases waiting for them. In one of them was hidden Qilin. Dumbledore asked Newt if he knew which of the suitcases was real, to which Newt replied that he did not know. Dumbledore replied that it was good, because if he had known, the plan would not work. Dumbledore had successfully planned an escape plan in case Grindelwald's men would attack. The 3 suitcases contained enchanted books, quaffle, bludgers, and Jacob's pastries that would attack the Grindelwald's acolytes in case of trouble. Everyone apart from Albus took 1 suitcase, and they all used a Qilin ceremony portkey to the magisterial chamber of ancient wizardry in Bhutan. Dumbledore and Jacob went first, the rest followed. During the ceremony, Grindelwald used the revived Qilin, which bowed to him, making him the new Supreme Mugwump. Dumbledore witnessed how Grindelwald used the Cruciatus curse on Jacob. Newt, however, wanted to expose Grindelwald, and with the help of Credence revealed that Grindelwald was a liar. When Bunty appeared, Newt pulled a second Qilin from the suitcase. The second Qilin bowed before Albus. While honored by the Qilin selection, he declined to assume office, saying there was a second person equally deserving to be Supreme Mugwump. Ultimately, Vicencia Santos won the election, as the Qilin bowed to her. Out of anger, Grindelwald cast a killing curse at Credence, which was deflected by Albus and Aberforth. The deflected curse damaged the Bloodpack's pendant, which Dumbledore owned. The vial was destroyed. because neither Dumbledore nor Grindelwald thought of attacking each other. One wanted to kill someone, the other wanted to defend. Immediately, both wizards dueled each other, which ended in an impasse. When the Aurors and the rest gathered to capture Grindelwald, he told Albus before disapparating that he had never been their enemy now or then. Later, Dumbledore witnessed Newt, Tina Goldstein, Theseus, and Lally attending Jacob's and Queenie Goldstein's wedding in New York City. Albus thanked Newt for his help, to which Newt replied that if Albus asked him again, he would help him. At some point in his career, Albus also became involved with the recruitment of students for Hogwarts, becoming a special messenger for the school whose job it was to visit the young witches and wizards whose names appeared in the Book of Admittance and came from Muggle families in order to explain to their parents that magic existed and to deliver the acceptance letter in person. Most prominent among the students he recruited was Tom Riddle in 1938, who resided at Wool's Orphanage in London. For the purposes of fulfilling his duty as the school's messenger, Dumbledore wrote to the matron, Mrs. Cole, to schedule a meeting with her to discuss arrangements for the boy's future. Because young Riddle was a ward of the state, and she the custodian of the institution at which he lived rather than the boy's legal guardian. However, Albus was purposefully vague in his reasons for wanting to meet the boy. Thinking he might be a family member wanting to claim him, she accepted the preposition, and, at the agreed-upon time and date, Professor Dumbledore presented himself at the establishment in question. Shown in by one of the employees, Albus was formally introduced to Mrs. Cole, who invited him to join him in her office to talk about the reasons for his visit. The news that Tom had been accepted to attend the school where Albus taught came as a surprise to Mrs. Cole, who at Dumbledore's request recounted Tom Riddle's history at the orphanage, mostly notably the circumstances of Tom's birth, his antisocial behavior, and his extraordinary bad influence on the other children, including some very nasty incidents that resulted in the death of a pet rabbit, and a gathering with several of his peers in a cave that left them traumatized. Once it became clear that Albus would not be dissuaded from his mission, however, Mrs. Cole agreed to let him meet the prospective student and escorted him to the upper floor to the boy's room, where the two were formally introduced. Initially suspicious and hostile towards him, Albus found himself having to assure the boy that he was not, in fact, a doctor that had come to lock him up at the asylum, showing his awareness of the matron's suspicions about his behavior, and was finally able to extend the invitation to Hogwarts and inform him that he was in fact a wizard. And though he was impressed to hear, as Mrs. Cole's testimony suggested, how well developed his powers were for such a young wizard, as well as how his degree of control over them was such that he had already begun to use them intentionally. It was also during this encounter that Albus first learned that the boy was a parcel moth, a fact that he did not find nearly as concerning as the boy's obvious instincts for cruelty, secrecy, and domination. Upon discovering that Riddle had stolen from the other children at the orphanage, Dumbledore admonished him for his behavior and instructed him to return the items to their rightful owners and apologize for taking them, warning him that he had exercised his abilities in a manner that would be unacceptable at Hogwarts, should he agree to attend. Thereafter, Dumbledore provided him with enough information to find Diagon Alley in Platform 9 3/4, as well as a stipend from school funds, so that he could purchase his books and other equipment. On account of his conduct around his peers, Dumbledore became immediately suspicious of, and resolved to keep a close eye on him during his studies at the school. Albus Dumbledore. What are you doing wandering around this late, Tom? Tom Riddle. I had to see the headmaster, sir. Albus Dumbledore. Well, hurry off to bed. Best not to roam the corridors these days. Not since, at an unknown point in time, Dumbledore became the Professor of Transfiguration. In the 1944-1943 school year, Several Muggle-born students were mysteriously petrified by a beast rumored to have been released by the heir of Slytherin from the mythical Chamber of Secrets. Indeed, the final victim of the beast, Myrtle Warren, was actually killed. This act seemed likely to ensure the permanent closure of the school, forcing Riddle to go back to the orphanage. While Dumbledore rightly suspected Riddle was behind the attacks, the aspiring dark wizard expertly framed Gryffindor student Rubeus Hagrid as the perpetrator. Riddle was able to pass off Hagrid's tamed acromantula, Aragog, as the beast attacking students, resulting in Hagrid's expulsion and ensuring that Hogwarts remained open. Dumbledore was never able to uncover hard evidence implicating Riddle. However, he nonetheless kept a very close watch over Riddle, preventing him from opening the Chamber of Secrets again during his remaining years at Hogwarts. He was also able to convince the headmaster to allow Hagrid to remain at the school as the groundskeeper in training. As Dumbledore was educating young wizards and witches, Gellert Grindelwald was still at large in Europe building up his army and had already found one of the Deathly Hallows, the Elder Wand, which he used to continue terrorizing the continent. Initially prevented from opposing Grindelwald directly because of the blood pact they once made, even once that was destroyed, Dumbledore still felt conflicted about going after his old friend. In spite of himself, he still felt a lingering love for the man Grindelwald had been, or rather, the man he had once convinced himself Grindelwald was and/or could be. More than anything, however, Dumbledore feared facing Grindelwald. While secure in his ability to defeat him in battle if it came to it, more than anything, Dumbledore was afraid Grindelwald could reveal to him that it had in fact been he himself who had cast the curse that killed Ariana. Having delayed pursuing him as long as he could, however, at the height of Grindelwald's power in 1945, Albus could no longer in good conscience turn a blind eye to the many atrocities of Grindelwald and his followers, and so he finally tracked his old friend down. Upon finding Grindelwald, Dumbledore engaged him in what would later be widely considered the greatest duel ever fought between two wizards. Dumbledore defeated Grindelwald and then brought him before the authorities of the magical world, and Grindelwald was imprisoned in the uppermost cell at Nurmengard, while Dumbledore kept the Elder Wand for himself. Celebrated worldwide as the hero who put to rest the global wizarding war and ended Grindelwald's for the greater good revolution of wizarding dominance over Muggles, Dumbledore was awarded the Order of Merlin First Class by Leonard Spencer Moon's administration. Resuming his career following this legendary event, Albus was offered the position of Minister for Magic several times, but he turned down the offer every time, remembering how his quest for power had been his weakness in the past. It was around this time that he encountered a house elf named Hoki. Before she died, he took a memory from her in which Tom Riddle showed his interest towards the magical antiques of the recently deceased Hepzibah Smith, whose death by a little-known poison had been blamed on Hoki. This memory was not sufficient evidence to show Hoki's innocence, as it only proved that Riddle was aware of the artifact's existence. As though the opening of the legendary Chamber of Secrets some 30-odd years back had not been bad enough. However, a young witch by the name of Patricia Rakepick arrived at Hogwarts, and eventually caught Dumbledore's attention not only by virtue of the fact that she had been unusually gifted magically, but also due to her extensive research into the fabled Cursed Vaults. Myth would have it that there were a number of concealed rooms hidden in and around Hogwarts Castle, each shielded by a different curse to guard priceless treasures of gold, prophecies, and powerful magical artifacts dating back to before the school was founded. Convinced that the vaults were real, Rakepick had tried to warn the staff about them, but seen as how neither she nor anyone else for that matter had ever come close enough to finding them to offer up any solid proof for their existence. Her professors, Albus included, did not act on it at the time. By the mid-1960s, the amount of dark magical activity across the country was growing steadily, And while few knew what was behind the mounting attacks and sightings, this was but the precursor to Lord Voldemort's first rise to power. Aware that it was only a matter of time before his former student made his presence and intent known to the wizarding community at large, and already preparing to actively oppose him, by the time the Death Eaters began recruiting dark creatures to help them overthrow the Ministry of Magic, and the Ministry in turn started to call upon the services of authorities on such matters to help it understand and contain the threat, the old Transfiguration teacher already had spies in their midst reporting to him. It was through these contacts that Dumbledore first learned of the attack on a young boy by the name of Remus Lupin, who had been infected with lycanthropy by a Fenrir Greyback. Rather than trying to manage his condition, however, the attacker had instead made it his mission in life to infect as many people as possible, and was harboring grand plans of raising an army of werewolves, big enough to take over the wizarding community, and even earned quite a bit of notoriety for targeting children with the intent of raising them away from other witches and wizards in order to teach them to despise regular humans. Knowing how this would have had to have impacted the Lupin family, the old Transfiguration teacher could not help but be sympathetic to their predicament. As fortune would have it, however, a blessing in disguise presented itself when the Board of Governors was faced with the decision of finding a suitable candidate to succeed Armando Dippet, and concluded that Professor Dumbledore was the best man for the job. This in turn granted him the authority to properly accommodate the Lupins when the time came for Remus to attend school. Shortly after Dumbledore assumed the position, by which time he had already relocated to the Headmaster's Tower and filled his new study with a number of curious magical instruments that had formerly been housed in his old classroom. Tom Riddle, now known exclusively as Lord Voldemort, approached him with the same request he had made to Dippet before him, to be allowed to return to Hogwarts as a teacher. Dumbledore, who knew of Voldemort's illicit activities since he left Hogwarts and suspected that he might have meant to use the position as means of recruiting more followers, turned down his application. This led Voldemort to angrily jinx the position of defense against the dark arts instructor, preventing anyone from holding the position for more than a single school year. What was more, while being entrusted the stewardship of the school was in and of itself an honor and a privilege, it also meant that he was henceforth expected to shoulder the responsibility of making all the difficult decisions that came with leadership. On such occasions, Dumbledore would step out into the clock tower courtyard, where he found the quiet starry night and the crisp air helpful in regard to putting one's troubles in perspective, and developed a habit of pacing around his new office a lot, especially in troubled and trying times such as when the security of the castle was breached. On occasion he would also see students in his office, be it because of a misdemeanor that had to be addressed, or because one of the pupils sought redress during conflicts with their peers, such as Bertha Jorkins. At some point following his appointment, Professor Dumbledore began to offer to help students with their homework, whom he would meet every Friday in classroom. Fond of festivities in general, he would also usually stand for the entertainment during the annual Halloween feast in the Great Hall. As the day neared when young Remus Lupin would be of an eligible age to begin his magical education, Dumbledore wasted little time in making the necessary preparations for the young man's arrival. To this end, Dumbledore arranged for a house to be built a little way above the rest of the nearby Hogsmeade, perched atop a hill overlooking the village. Once finished, the headmaster applied the appropriate spells to provide Remus with a safe and secure place for his transformations that could contain even a fully grown werewolf if necessary. Next, he arranged for an underground passage to be made on the school grounds to give Remus an easy and discreet way of accessing the building when necessary, and had a whomping willow planted over the opening both to hide it from view and as a security measure to stop anyone from coming across the future pupil whilst he was dangerous. Shortly before 10 March 1971, Dumbledore showed up unannounced at the doorstep of Lial and Hope Lupin to invite their son to attend school. Well aware that their initial reaction, namely to try and keep him from entering their home, stemmed from fear more than anything else, the headmaster took the liberty of finding his own way into the house. 5 minutes later, Dumbledore was sitting on their living room floor by the fireplace, eating crumpets and playing gobstones with Remus. After explaining to the three of them that he was aware of their situation, and, more importantly, that as far as he was concerned, there was no reason why Remus should not be able to attend Hogwarts, as long as special precautions were taken to ensure the safety of both Remus and the other student, a mutual understanding was reached, and it was eventually agreed that young Mr. Lupin would indeed present himself at Hogwarts Castle for the start of term. This would forever earn Dumbledore Remus's gratitude, as most others would simply have forbidden the boy from even setting foot in the school. When Severus Snape found out Remus's secret, Dumbledore forbade him from repeating it to anyone. First Wizarding War, Severus Snape. Hide them all then. Keep them safe, please, Dumbledore. And what will you give me in return, Severus? Severus Snape. In return? Anything. Snape pleading with Dumbledore to protect Lily Potter. The Marauders in Order of the Phoenix Image, some of the members of the original Order of the Phoenix, after Lord Voldemort started his first rise to power in 1970. Dumbledore, around whom opposition to the Dark Lord had always rallied, founded and led the Order of the Phoenix, a secret society willing to risk their lives to fight Voldemort and his Death Eaters. And despite the fact that the group suffered heavy losses during the conflict, it was also a significant contributor to the war effort. Throughout Dumbledore's efforts to undermine the Dark Lord's rise to power, a great many witches and wizards past was educated at Hogwarts. Some of these became staunchly loyal to him and what he stood for, whereas others would become enemies, allying themselves with Lord Voldemort. Among these students were future Order members Arthur Weasley and Molly Pruitt, Death Eaters to be Bellatrix Black and Lucius Malfoy. Later on in the war, Dumbledore was approached by another person who also wanted a job at Hogwarts, Sybil Trelawney, who applied to become the new professor of divination, a subject Dumbledore disliked and barely considered a part of necessary education for young wizards and witches. Dumbledore gave her a chance because she was the great-great-granddaughter of the celebrated seer Cassandra Trelawney. To his disappointment, when he was interviewing Sybil at the Hog's Head, he came to the conclusion that she was not a real seer. However, as Dumbledore was about to leave, Trelawney fell into a real trance and made a prophecy about the birth of the one that would have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, who would be born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month died. This astonished Dumbledore, but as it turned out, the Death Eater Severus Snape had overheard most of the prophecy, but had been caught in the act of spying and ejected from the tavern by Aberforth. Dumbledore hired Trelawney in order to protect her from the Death Eaters. No sooner had Rakeape completed her tutelage and left her school days behind, however, before her spiritual successor arrived to begin his own. Over the course of his school career, young Jacob earned a steadily increasing notoriety by not only having picked up where she had left off, but he had even succeeded where she failed. A feat he accomplished with the help of two of his classmates, Duncan Ashe and Olivia Green, who were in Slytherin and Ravenclaw House, respectively. Between the latter's arrival in 1974 and his eventual banishment from the castle not only had this trio of friends managed to penetrate one of the oldest and most dangerous secrets that the ancient castle had to offer, but they had also broken countless school rules and inadvertently endangered their peers by tampering with the vaults by unleashing a myriad devastating curses upon the school. This did not, however, discourage the headmaster from taking a personal interest in Jacob, who was both one of the most rebellious and most talented students at the time. Having sensed his underlying decency of instinct despite his disregard for the school rules, and, more importantly, fully recognized that there had been no malintent on his part when he had triggered the safeguards of the vaults, having done so on accident, Dumbledore was very lenient with the boy. Even so, he still kept a close eye on him, and had even gone to some lengths to help him, which included giving him private lessons to help him nurture his gift as a born legilimens. He did not, however, condone their continued fixation with the cursed vaults, particularly in the case of Jacob himself, who eventually grew dangerously obsessive with opening all of the vaults, having grown concerned that this fixation might even drive him mad, and finally unable to overlook their pursuit for the vaults for these reasons. He was known to have reprimanded both Jacob and Mr. Ashe for their many indiscretions on at least one occasion. Despite his best efforts to help Jacob, however, and even though Dumbledore and the rest of the staff ultimately got the situation under control, their hunt for the vaults ended in tragedy when Duncan Ashe was killed while attempting to brew a particularly potent irrumpent potion in an effort to get past one of the obstacles standing between them and one of the cursed vaults. Neither the first nor the last casualty at the school as a result of Jacob's extracurricular activities. Olivia Green also endured hardships as a result, with the death of a student on their hands as a direct result of their search for the vaults. Dumbledore notified the Ministry of Magic about Duncan's untimely demise, at which point 2 Aurors were sent to bring Jacob in for questioning. Having found him at the Three Broomsticks Inn, they promptly grabbed him by the hood of his robes and dragged him out the door. Having been informed of Jacob's subsequent confession that he had pressured his friend into making the potion as part of their bid for the vaults, Dumbledore had no other choice but to expel him from the school. And even though Jacob's removal was prominently covered at the time in the Daily Prophet, the faculty still denied any knowledge that the vault's existence, both to dissuade students from pursuing them and to prevent the ministry and concerned parents from inserting themselves into Hogwarts affairs. Several months after Dumbledore was forced to terminate his enrollment, however, not only did word reach him that Jacob had run away from home, and, rumors had it, earned notoriety in the figurative underworld as the most feared wizard in Knockturn Alley, which led to the misconception that he had even become a follower of Lord Voldemort. After a subsequent discussion with the late Duncan Ashe, however, who had returned as a ghost following his unfortunate passing, not only was it established beyond any reasonable doubt that Jacob had never been Death Eater material, but more importantly, the headmaster learned about the horrible truth behind Jacob's obsession with the vaults, as well as the highly significant and mitigating circumstances surrounding the part he had played in the events that had led up to his expulsion from the school in the first place. Throughout their attendance at Hogwarts, Jacob, Duncan, and Olivia had all been on the receiving end of a series of threatening messages from a secret society of dark witches and wizards calling itself the Cabal, which had coerced them into becoming unwilling pawns in the group's bid for the cursed vaults, by informing them that failure to cooperate would have meant their deaths. Their involvement had been a covert one indeed, as not only had all of this taken place right under the noses of Dumbledore and the rest of the faculty, but it had even been subtle enough that Jacob's search for the vaults had seemed, to the castle's other inhabitants, like nothing more the self-seeking exploit of a reckless youth. Only then was Dumbledore made aware that the true driving force behind Jacob's obsession was his love for his family. Even under duress, Jacob had actually gone to some lengths to try and protect the school and defied the group by moving all of their research into the vaults from the boathouse, where he and his accomplices had been holding secret meetings while they were still under R's heel, to a new home in order to hide it from them. In response to Jacob's resistance, however, the Cabal had raised the stakes and threatened to make his mother and his younger sibling disappear if he refused to cooperate. thus forcing Jacob's compliance and explaining the urgency with which he pursued the cursed vaults in the later parts of his education. And it had been for this reason that Jacob had taken the blame for the very potion that the Cabal had forced Duncan Ashe to make, as he feared that they would go after his family had he tried to expose them. Even though Dumbledore was fully prepared to take the mitigating circumstances of Jacob's transgressions into account going forward, any decision the headmaster might have meant to make about revoking Jacob's expulsion, or help to fight the Cabal, ultimately became rather inappreciable when Jacob went mysteriously missing shortly thereafter. With Jacob gone and unable to protect his kin, and given the possibility that the Cabal, whose members were still unknown and very much at large, might make good on their threats had he began to move against them prematurely, Dumbledore kept most of his findings to himself. As such, there were only 3 people who knew the full story once the dust had settled: Jacob, Duncan Ashe, and the headmaster himself. Certain that Hogwarts had not seen the last of the Cabal, however, he tasked his old friend, veteran Auror, and brother-in-arms in the Order of the Phoenix, Alistair Moody, with investigating the Cabal, who henceforth monitored their activities off the book. Between the wars, 19 Fall of the Dark Lord, Minerva McGonagall, as I say, even if you know who has gone. Albus Dumbledore, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. Minerva McGonagall, I know you haven't, but you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you know. Oh, all right, Voldemort was frightened of Albus Dumbledore. You flatter me. Voldemort had powers I will never have. Minerva McGonagall. Only because you're too, well, noble to use them. Albus Dumbledore and Minerva McGonagall discussing Voldemort's downfall in Privet Drive. Albus Dumbledore giving evidence in court. Albus Dumbledore in 1981, at age 100, during the trial of Igor Karkaroff. Still, the Wizarding War raged beyond the walls of Hogwarts. Shortly before the Potters' deaths, Dumbledore discovered that James's cloak of invisibility was, in fact, one of the Deathly Hallows. Although Dumbledore had long given up his desire to unite the Hallows and become Master of Death, he could not resist the thought of studying the cloak. To that end, he borrowed it from James while James and Lily were in hiding. Later, Severus Snape approached Dumbledore, having already told Voldemort about the prophecy. Snape was shocked by the fact that Voldemort had concluded that the prophecy was about Harry Potter, the son of James Potter, and Snape's own beloved childhood friend, Lily Evans. Dumbledore agreed on the basis that Snape worked as a double agent for the Order. Dumbledore made arrangements to ensure the safety of the 3. He advised them to stay hidden in their house in Godric's Hollow, which was protected by a Fidelius charm. However, their secret keeper, believed by Dumbledore and everyone else to be Sirius Black, but was in truth Peter Pettigrew, betrayed them, resulting in James and Lily's deaths at Voldemort's hand. However, as Voldemort attempted to murder Harry, the curse backfired due to the protection provided by Lily Potter's love for her son, and destroyed his body. This unfortunate occurrence provided Dumbledore with ownership of 2 of the Hallows, having already confirmed James's old cloak was indeed the one of legend. Presumably well aware that Lord Voldemort wasn't truly vanquished, Dumbledore made sure that Harry would be kept safe with his family, the Dursleys, despite them not being selected as his guardians in the event of James and Lily's death, as his spells ensured that Voldemort could not harm Harry there, as long as he could have a home with those with whom he was related by blood. Specifically, while Lily's initial sacrifice saved Harry from Voldemort, in order for the charm to continue protecting him, his Aunt Petunia would have had to take Harry into her home to seal the charm. Dumbledore himself would later tell Harry that this was the strongest protection he could provide for Harry over the long term, and not even the most powerful complex protection spells could be guaranteed to work. Dumbledore, while noting the reason why Harry had to live with the Dursleys, also expressed regret that Harry was denied a more loving home. He convinced Snape to help him protect Harry, although years later Dumbledore secretly planned to allow Voldemort to kill Harry in the end, which would destroy the piece of Voldemort's soul inside Harry. However, he also hoped to influence Harry into such a person who would willingly sacrifice his life for the greater good, allowing him the chance to choose between life and death in the end, guessing correctly the significance of such an act. Shortly thereafter, Dumbledore gave Snape employment at Hogwarts as the potions master, and later defended Snape against the Ministry of Magic, who were rounding up and arresting remaining Death Eaters. Dumbledore attended many Death Eater trials, including that of the Lestranges and Barty Crouch Jr. He was also a witness to Igor Karkaroff's testimony, which secured his release from Azkaban in return for the names of fellow Death Eaters. With Harry safe and certain members of the Order of the Phoenix and allies of their cause keeping watch over him and reporting back to Dumbledore, he continued his work as the brilliant if eccentric headmaster of his beloved school. Professor Dumbledore at the 1984 start of term feast. At the start of term feast during the 1984-1985 school year, Professor Dumbledore witnessed the sorting ceremony of first-year students, including Charlie Weasley, Nymphadora Tonks, and Jacob's younger sibling, after which he stood behind the owl lectern and gave a traditional welcoming speech. In his speech, he mentioned how Harry Potter was safe and would himself attend Hogwarts when old enough, along with house points and the yearly house cup. At some point during the school year, Dumbledore was informed by Professor Severus Snape about cursed ice resurfacing in Hogwarts Castle and a locked room which possibly contained the source of it. After Jacob's sibling and Marula Snide dueled in the courtyard without permission or supervision, Dumbledore introduced the students to the Hogwarts Dueling Club in the dungeons, where dueling could be practiced safely. He made certain to impress on the students how the destruction caused by these duels was left there so other students who wanted to duel could see how dangerous dueling could be and consider the implications of casting unfriendly spells. Before this year's Halloween feast, several students volunteered to help Dumbledore with decorations, such as the carving of jack-o'-lanterns and crafting hats for a troupe of dancing skeletons. Near the end of the feast, however, the school was under attack by a pack of werewolves, and after Dumbledore successfully removed 5 that had almost overran Hagrid's hut, he came back to the training grounds in time to save Jacob's sibling and another unconscious student from 3 more, including Fenrir Greyback, who caught the scent of Dumbledore and left. The headmaster examined the unconscious student, who was Chiara Labosca, and concluded that she had not been bitten. He then informed the Ministry of Magic about the incident, and as a result, Cecil Lee was sent to investigate. A month later, the castle was under another attack by Greyback's army, during which Chiara fought as a werewolf to protect Jacob's sibling. The headmaster came to know this identity of Chiara and extended her the same offer he had done Remus Lupin years before. When this whole incident was over, Dumbledore held another Halloween feast to finish what had been left out. Before Rubeus Hagrid's birthday, Dumbledore decided to throw him a surprise birthday party. He first contacted Jacob's sibling, who was already a friend of Hagrid, and then went to find Amos Diggory, who agreed to drop by the castle with a selection of magical creatures for them to pick from as a birthday gift. In order to distract Hagrid, Dumbledore asked him to meet at the training grounds and help take care of some urgent business in Hogsmeade, while Jacob's sibling stayed behind and babysat Fang. When they returned, Dumbledore instructed Jacob's sibling to invite Professor Snape next, even if they had to bribe him with a gift. The birthday party was held as scheduled and turned out to be a huge success. Around Christmas, students continued to help Dumbledore with festive decorations. This tradition would be continued for the following few years. When Dumbledore found out Jacob's sibling and their friends had broken into the locked room, He talked to Jacob's sibling in the courtyard. Instead of handing out punishment, Dumbledore awarded them 100 house points for their brave acts. Nevertheless, he reminded them that the impact on others should be kept in mind in their coming years. At the end of the school year, Dumbledore announced the winner of the House Cup as usual. Dumbledore spent most of the 1985-1986 school year outside Hogwarts, looking for a professional curse breaker, Patricia Rakepick, whose help he needed for finding the cursed vaults. He was present at the start of term feast, delivering his welcoming speech while also offering a word of caution. Ben Copper was soon found missing, and Dumbledore was possibly paid a visit by Professor McGonagall, who informed him the secret message Jacob's sibling had found in the locked room. After Abdul was gone, he possibly received an owl from one of the professors alerting him to the activities of When he was back at Hogwarts, he found that the Vault of Ice had again been broken into by Jacob's sibling and their friends, which led to the disappearance of the cursed ice. He required to see them in the headmaster's office and rewarded them another 50 points, but warned them never to go near the cursed vaults again. At some point while he was at Hogwarts, the headmaster presided over this year's teacher appreciation celebration, with the guest of honor being McGonagall. At another point, Dumbledore arranged for Olympia Maxime, the headmistress of Beauxbaton Academy of Magic, to visit Hogwarts to discuss school matters, and Maxime brought Henri Dumont, a student of her, who came to search for Nicholas Flamel's chalice. When Dumbledore met Henri Lee, he talked about his own experience of learning alchemy with Nicholas Flamel and denied the existence of such item at Hogwarts, but nevertheless encouraged her not to give up on her goals. Before the start of term feast of the 1986-1987 school year, Professor Dumbledore spoke to the students, confirming the existence of the cursed vaults and imposing a blanket ban on all future attempts to look for the rest of them. It was most likely also Dumbledore who instructed Jacob's siblings' head of house to not permit them to go on Hogsmeade trips due to them breaking school rules and not focusing on their studies. During a third-year herbology class, a boggart manifested in one of the greenhouses, assuming the form of a werewolf and terrifying students. Professor Pomona Sprout reported the incident to Dumbledore immediately after taking care of Boggart. At some point during the school year, Dumbledore was approached by Merula Snide, who showed him the witch-sharpening potion she had allegedly been working on. He also spoke to Jacob's sibling, who was disguised as Professor Snape, about various businesses. During the conversation, he even indirectly revealed the identity of the curse breaker he had been finding in the past year, who had some school years overlapping with Snape's. Though he wasn't aware of who he was actually talking to, he still figured something was off. When Professor Snape asked Merula to come forward and admit her wrongdoing of claiming credit for the potion actually brewed by Penny Haywood, Dumbledore invited Penny up on the podium to receive the credit she deserved. It was also at this moment that he realized the true identity of Snape's. He awarded them 10 house points for their loyalty and cheerfully advised them to leave before the effects of the Polyjuice potion wore off. Before Dumbledore left Hogwarts again to search for Rakepick, he gave Rita Skeeter periodical permission to visit Hogwarts Castle to observe the students, and to invite them to partake in a friendly competition where the winner would receive a first-page article in the Daily Prophet. During this search, Dumbledore was finally able to track down Rakepick, who was investigating some ancient ruins that had recently been discovered beneath Castelobruxo. Unable to leave Brazil until her work there was finished, an arrangement was made where she would instead come to Hogwarts at the beginning of the next term. Dumbledore doubted whether the elusiveness of Rakepick indicated problems regarding her trustworthiness, but eventually chose to give her the benefit of the doubt due to the lack of real evidence. When Dumbledore was back, he paid Jacob's sibling and their friends a visit in the Three Broomsticks Inn, where they were celebrating their success regarding the break-in of the Vault of Fear. Back at his office, Dumbledore listened to Jacob's siblings' vault-breaking story and talked about his own adventure. Despite them breaking the rules again, Dumbledore still awarded Jacob's sibling 100 house points, but warned them never to do it again. At some point during the school year, the International Confederation of Wizards was due to convene for a conference somewhere in Great Britain, for which Rubeus Hagrid was invited to give a demonstration on thestrals to clear up misconceptions involving them, specifically by showing that even a thestral that had had limited exposure to strangers could be comfortable working with several of them. To help him prepare his speech, the headmaster advised him to solicit the assistance of Jacob's sibling and Marula Snide, hoping that working with thestrals could help Marula, who had seen her mother murdering an Auror, thus enabling her to see thestrals, confront her past and move on. Once he had given Hagrid adequate time to get ready, and time came for them to depart for the meeting, Dumbledore went to the training grounds to collect him, and was delighted to find that both his attempt to help the troubled pupil and the aforementioned assembly had been an immense success, the latter of which had inspired many in the crowd to start treating the Dark Horses with kindness and respect. At the start of the 1987-1988 school year, Professor Dumbledore introduced Madame Patricia Rakepick to the entire school, charging her with everything related to the Cursed Vaults, and making her an official non-teaching staff member, capable of docking house points. Soon it was found that Tulip Karasu and a couple of other students were inflicted with a sleepwalking curse, which was inevitably caused by someone tampering with another cursed vault. Despite the difficulty the school was experiencing, Dumbledore and the rest of the faculty decided it needed distraction and some happy memory. So they arranged an astronomy-themed social gathering for the students in the Great Hall known as the Celestial Ball. Dumbledore was able to persuade Madame Pince to allow the election for the head of a student committee that would be in charge of the decorations to take place in the library. He then summoned the students to the Great Hall and announced the event, encouraging students to partake in the election for the decorating committee. Dumbledore attended the Celestial Ball with other faculty members, at the start of which he gave a short speech commending the decorating committee's success. After Jacob's sibling and their friends got out of the forest vault which they had successfully broken into, Dumbledore and Filch greeted them in the Forbidden Forest. Dumbledore told Jacob's sibling they continued to exhibit little respect for Hogwarts's rules and himself, and gave them detention in the kitchens under Pitz's supervision for the next school year. Dumbledore's decision to appoint Rakepick proved a costly one, as Rakepick turned out to be one of Ria's members, and nearly managed to kill Jacob's sibling and their friends, before being defeated by a garroting gas and forced to flee, but left Marula Snide traumatized with the betrayal and use of the Cruciatus Curse when they went to the Cursed Vault. Dumbledore was away at the time and unable to stop it, and was left responsible with what had happened, admitting regret for being outside to deal with threats, and promising to prioritize capturing Rakepick. The next year was by no means any less troublesome than the previous year, with Jacob's sibling, their friends, more determined than ever to stop and find the last cursed vault, despite Dumbledore's attempts to make them focus on their studies. He was even more disturbed with how Ben Cooper and Marula Snide had become different due to the events of last year, and that an Azkaban escapee who turned out to be an expelled student of Mahutokoro's School of Magic was working with Ar. When Rowan Canna was killed by Rakepick, Dumbledore led a huge memorial to their noble sacrifice. 1990. In this school year, Dumbledore sent several 7th-year students to the British Ministry of Magic as a part of a student program. Harry Potter. But why couldn't Quirrell touch me? Albus Dumbledore, your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. He didn't realize that love as powerful as your mother's for you leaves its own mark, not a scar. No visible sign to have been loved so deeply, Even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever. It is in your very skin. Quirrell, full of hatred, greed and ambition, sharing his soul with Voldemort, could not touch you for this reason. It was agony to touch a person marked by something so good. Dumbledore and Harry discussing the power of love, essay. 10 years after Dumbledore left Harry Potter with his uncle and aunt, the Dursleys, Harry started attending Hogwarts. Not as emotionally healthy as Dumbledore might have hoped, considering the neglect he had faced at the hands of his intolerant aunt and uncle, but alive and well and happy to be away from his horrible relatives. That year, Lord Voldemort formulated a plan to regain human form. Dumbledore and his friend Nicholas Flamel, the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone, began to suspect that the disembodied Dark Lord was plotting to steal the invaluable object, which would be capable of restoring him to full power. Dumbledore had the stone moved to a medium security vault at Gringotts Wizarding Bank, but later had it moved to Hogwarts itself, coincidentally on the same day that an attempted break-in was made upon the vault. It was retrieved by Hagrid, who was also taking Harry to buy his school supplies. Dumbledore and several teachers, McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, Snape, and dubiously Quirrell, at Hogwarts planted magical security methods to protect the stone. Dumbledore was behind the final and most powerful protection placed upon the stone. He enchanted the Mirror of Eris to contain the Philosopher's Stone, only to be removed by someone who did not intend to use or possess it, but only to keep it from the hands of evil. Dumbledore suspected that the Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor Quirinus Quirrell was behind the plot to steal the Philosopher's Stone, while working for the weakened Lord Voldemort, and as such, he asked Snape to keep an eye on him. He also anonymously returned James's cloak of invisibility to Harry as a Christmas present. Over a series of nights, Harry Potter proceeded to visit the Mirror of Eris as often as he could to see his parents' faces. Dumbledore found Harry visiting the mirror one night, and after explaining to Harry what the mirror was all about, told him that the mirror was to be moved, and requested that Harry not go looking for it. Before heading back to bed, Harry asked Dumbledore what he saw when he looked into the mirror. Dumbledore claimed to see himself holding a pair of thick woolen socks, telling Harry that one can never have enough socks. However, Dumbledore was joking, the matter being a very personal one. At first, still yearning for Grindelwald's love, Albus saw himself with his former lover in the mirror. However, after Grindelwald's defeat, and having come to terms with his past guilt over his sister's death, later in his life, Dumbledore would see his family whole and intact, free of any pain or suffering. It is unknown if Grindelwald as a redeemed man was included in these later reflections. When Quirrell decided to make his move on getting the Philosopher's Stone, he lured Dumbledore away from the school using a false letter from the Ministry for Magic. The moment Dumbledore was on his way, he was intercepted by an owl from Ron and Hermione, which carried a letter that explained the whole situation. Dumbledore hurried back to the underground chambers and saved an unconscious Harry from Quirrell. In the end, it was Harry who protected the Philosopher's Stone from Quirrell and Voldemort. Voldemort failed for the same reasons he had failed to murder Harry previously, due to Lily Potter's love for Harry. When Voldemort, who had possessed the body of Quirrell, ordered his servant to attack the young boy, the sacrificial protection instilled within him at the point of his mother's death killed him and forced the Dark Lord's spirit to flee. When Harry recovered from the ordeal in the hospital wing, he questioned Dumbledore about why Voldemort had tried to murder him as a baby. Dumbledore did not believe that Harry was ready to know the truth about the prophecy Sybil Trelawney had made and told him he would know when he was older, although this would actually later turn out to be a mistake. At the end-of-year feast, Dumbledore awarded an extra 170 house points to Gryffindor students. Harry Potter 60, Ron Weasley 50, Hermione Granger 50, and Neville Longbottom 10 respectively for bravery and logical skills, prompting Gryffindor to win the House Cup, ruining Slytherin's chance of the cup for the 7th year in a row. This may have shown an amount of bias towards Gryffindor to announce their win in such unusual circumstances. Sometime before the next year began, Dumbledore, having never been fooled by Gilderoy Lockhart's tall tales, figured out the truth soon when Lockhart erased the memories of 2 wizards that Dumbledore personally knew. He realized that Lockhart had gone too far in his desire for fame and decided to track him down and make him pay for his crimes. Having the position of the Professor of the Defense Against the Dark Arts vacant proved to be useful for Dumbledore, as he offered Lockhart the job. And although Lockhart was reluctant as his career as an author was progressing very well, successfully convinced him by slyly hinting that Harry Potter was a second-year student in Hogwarts, causing Lockhart to having intended for Lockhart to show his ineptitude and fraudulence to the students and thus expose him to the public secretly. Dumbledore's decision was shocking to take by the other staff members, as they never forgot Lockhart as the obnoxious attention seeker back then, despite his achievements, with McGonagall asking what the students could possibly learn under a man as vain and celebrity-hungry as Lockhart. Dumbledore, however, skillfully talked himself out by pointing out that Lockhart was the only one who was willing to take it, and also saying that there was a lot to learn from even a bad teacher, what not to do, how not to be. 1990. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are far more than our abilities. Dumbledore's advice to Harry Potter. As Hogwarts professors and students coerce Albus Dumbledore and colleagues discovering a blood-written message on the wall. Shortly into the school year of 1992, students again fell under attack from a beast allegedly released from the Chamber of Secrets. Under the influence of Lucius Malfoy, the Hogwarts Board of Governors voted to remove Dumbledore from his position as headmaster, when he proved unable to uncover the culprit. Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge also had the groundskeeper, Rubeus Hagrid, taken to Azkaban, acting under the theory that it had been he who opened the chamber in. It was later revealed that first-year student Ginny Weasley had come into possession of Tom Riddle's diary, a bewitched object capable of interacting with whoever wrote in it. The diary slowly drained the life force from Ginny, and when the memory it contained was nearly strong enough to take physical form, it had her journey into the heart of the chamber. However, Harry Potter was able to find the chamber himself, and there defeated the beast that dwelt within. Salazar Slytherin's basilisk. He also destroyed the diary with one of the basilisk's fangs, saving Ginny and defeating the nearly fully formed memory of Riddle. Harry was only able to achieve these feats by displaying an extreme amount of loyalty to Dumbledore, for only someone truly loyal to the headmaster would be capable of summoning his pet Phoenix Fawkes, who provided the tools needed for Potter to defeat Riddle and the basilisk. Dumbledore mysteriously returned to his position as headmaster after the memory of Riddle was revealed as being behind the attacks. He commended both Harry and Ron for solving the mystery with the special award for services to the school and 200 points each for them. This secured Gryffindor for the House Cup for the 2nd year running, and again ruined Slytherin's chances, fueling the hatred and rivalry between the two houses. He also secured Hagrid's release from Azkaban by having Ron deliver his release papers via OWL and cancelled exams, as a special treat, much to the delight of the students and the dismay of Hermione Granger. Lucius Malfoy was also sacked from his position as a governor of Hogwarts, much to Draco's dismay and Harry's satisfaction. However, Dumbledore was privately concerned by the phenomena that Harry described. A mere memory capable of taking physical form was unheard of. Dumbledore then began to suspect that Riddle's diary was in fact a Horcrux. And furthermore, considering the lack of care the Dark Lord had taken in protecting the diary, that he had created more than one. During his final talk with Harry in his office, Dumbledore came close to telling Harry about his connection with Voldemort, but refrained from doing so as he felt that 12 years old was still too young to learn the truth. and he wanted Harry to enjoy this night of triumph. 19. Now, pay attention. Sirius is locked in Professor Flitwick's office on the 7th floor. 13th window from the right of the West Tower. If all goes well, you will be able to save more than one innocent life tonight. But remember this, both of you. You must not be seen. Miss Granger, you know the law. You know what is at stake. I am going to lock you in. It is 5 minutes to midnight. Miss Granger, 3 turns should do it. Good luck. Dumbledore giving instructions to save Sirius. The year after, the Ministry of Magic took it upon itself to increase security around Hogwarts. Sirius Black, who had been sentenced to life in Azkaban for murdering Peter Pettigrew and 12 Muggles with a single curse, had escaped from the wizarding prison. The Ministry, afraid that he was going after Harry Potter, placed a large number of Dementors at Hogwarts to try to recapture him. Dumbledore reluctantly tolerated the Dementors on school grounds, but refused to allow them within the school itself. However, the Dementors violated Dumbledore's decree when they entered the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, causing Harry to fall unconscious and fall from the sky. Dumbledore was able to prevent Harry from hitting the ground and repelled the Dementors with a Patronus. As the school year drew to its close, it became clear to Harry and his friends that Sirius Black had been framed for his crimes committed by Pettigrew, who has been disguised as Scabbers for 12 years. But Sirius was captured, locked in the highest tower, and sentenced to the Dementor's kiss. Dumbledore instantly believed Harry and his friends about Sirius's innocence, but the minister did not. Dumbledore was incapable of overruling the ministry's decision, despite him being chief warlock of the Wizengamot. Instead, Dumbledore told Hermione Granger to use her time turner to save Sirius, and, in the process, Buckbeak as well. Harry and Hermione's rescue mission was a success. Sirius escaped on Buckbeak. The Dementors were removed from the grounds for their attack on Harry and the attempted removal of his soul. During the rescue, Harry also conjured a powerful corporeal Patronus that Dumbledore later commented on. Dumbledore saw Remus Lupin, the new defense against the dark arts teacher, off after Snape leaked his identity as a werewolf to the school. Harry was also seeing Lupin off too, and Dumbledore could tell that Harry was troubled. Harry explained how guilty he felt allowing Pettigrew, the real culprit who had framed Sirius, to escape, which coincides with a prediction Trelawney made. Therefore, he feared that he may have indirectly given Voldemort a servant to return him to power. Dumbledore assured Harry that he did a noble thing in saving Pettigrew's life, forging a deep, magical bond between them, and he promised Harry that one day he'd be glad he spared Pettigrew. At the end of the year, Dumbledore began to feel uneasy about concealing the truth of Sybil Trelawney's prophecy, because even though Harry was still young, he had proven himself to be exceptional, and he would have to be told soon. 19. It is my belief, and never have I so hoped that I am mistaken, that we are all facing dark and difficult times. Some of you in this hall have already suffered directly at the hands of Lord Voldemort. A week ago, a student was taken from our midst. Remember, Cedric, remember. If the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy, remember what happened to a boy who was good and kind and brave because he strayed across the path of Lord Voldemort. Remember Cedric Diggory. Dumbledore giving respect to Cedric Diggory. Before the beginning of the new school year, the first Death Eater activity in years broke out at the Quidditch World Cup, causing Dumbledore to suspect that the second rise of Lord Voldemort was near. Later, Hogwarts played host to the first Triwizard Tournament since it was decided that only students of age would be allowed to enter their names to the Goblet of Fire because of the dangers the tournament represented and its high death toll. Dumbledore personally drew an age line around the magical artifact to ensure that this rule would be impossible to break. During this year, Dumbledore employed his old friend Alistair Moody, an ex-Auror, as the new defense against the dark arts professor. Moody took this position only as a personal favor to Dumbledore. However, unknown to anybody, a day before Moody was set to arrive at Hogwarts, he was overpowered by Death Eaters Barty Crouch Jr. and Peter Pettigrew. On the orders of Voldemort, Crouch brewed Polyjuice Potion, which he used to impersonate Moody and take his place at Hogwarts. Crouch, in the guise of Moody, successfully fooled the Goblet of Fire and ensured that Harry Potter was chosen as the fourth champion of the Triwizard Tournament. Crouch secretly aided Potter throughout the tournament, so that in the final task it would be him to touch the Triwizard Trophy first, which he had bewitched to become a portkey. When Harry and fellow champion Cedric Diggory touched the trophy at the same time, they were transported to the graveyard of Little Hangleton. There, Diggory was killed on the orders of Lord Voldemort, and Harry's blood was taken as the final ingredient in a potion the Dark Lord used to turn to full power. Using the portkey, Harry was able to escape Voldemort and return to Hogwarts. The entire school was shocked to witness an exhausted and injured Harry return with Diggory's body. It was when Crouch, still in the guise of Moody, took Harry from out of Dumbledore's presence, something the real Moody never would have done in such a traumatic situation, that the headmaster realized that it was not Moody who had been at the school the whole year. Dumbledore, Snape, and Minerva McGonagall quickly overpowered the Death Eater. It was in that moment that Harry realized exactly why Dumbledore was the only wizard that Voldemort ever feared. Barty then truthfully revealed the entirety of Voldemort's plot and his participation in it under the influence of Veritaserum. Dumbledore then took Harry to his office to meet Sirius, and there he asked Harry to fill him in on what had happened. He then took Harry to the hospital wing to recover. Despite all evidence to the contrary, Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge refused to believe that Lord Voldemort had returned Todd of power and had Crouch subjected to the Dementor's kiss before he could be forced to stand trial before the Wizengamot. Despite this, Dumbledore knew that Voldemort's return was real, and in response to Fudge's failure to act, reformed the Order of the Phoenix, an alliance brought together during the First Wizarding War to fight against Voldemort and his followers. Dumbledore chose to reform the Order as he feared that the start of the Second Wizarding War was lingering and inevitable to happen. Again, Dumbledore was reminded of Harry's exceptional skill and knew that he would surely have to be told of the prophecy soon. But again, he chose not to, out of a desire to spare Harry an additional burden. The Ministry immediately began to deny Dumbledore and Harry's claims that the Dark Lord had returned, starting a smear campaign designed to slander and vilify them. In particular, Dumbledore was removed from his positions as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot and Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, as punishment for his refusal to stay in line with Ministry propaganda. However, Dumbledore professed not to care, so long as the Ministry did not eliminate him from Chocolate Frog cards. He confessed that he believed that Fudge's persecution of him was of his own free will and not due to the Imperious Curse, though this was small comfort. Before the beginning of the school year, Dumbledore was made secret keeper of the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix and ensured that Harry Potter's friends did not divulge any information about the Order to him, as he did not want the Order to be compromised in any way. Dumbledore attended Harry's trial at the Ministry, arriving 3 hours early at 5 a.m. by a handy mistake. He presented Arabella Figg for Harry's defense and offered to call Dobby to testify that Harry had not used a hover charm in 1992, and reminded Fudge that he himself had pardoned Harry's accidental inflation of Marjorie Dursley. He also commented on the unusual behavior of the court holding a full criminal hearing for a simple case of underage magic. After the Wizengamot had ruled in Harry's favor, Dumbledore left without having so much as spoken to Harry or looked at him. When the time came to choose the prefects from the 5th years, Dumbledore considered Harry, but out of sympathy for the ordeals he had faced, and the ones still to come. He chose to spare him the added responsibility and passed it on to Ron Weasley. This decision confused some people who had assumed Harry would naturally receive it and would have shown solidarity with the young wizard. Dumbledore had come to fear the connection that existed between the Dark Lord and Harry, and purposely avoided him throughout the school year. When signs of this connection became increasingly obvious, Dumbledore had Severus Snape attempt to teach Harry the art of occlumency rather than himself, as he feared that Voldemort may have been able to peer into his mind through his connection to Harry. The Ministry also began to interfere heavily at Hogwarts. They appointed Fudge's senior Undersecretary Dolores Umbridge to the post of defense against the dark arts professor. Umbridge started her reign at Hogwarts by rudely interrupting Dumbledore's start-of-term feast. Things got progressively worse from there. Umbridge and Fudge slowly passed rules and regulations that siphoned the powers of the headmaster, while increasing those of Umbridge herself, until finally Umbridge was granted the new position of High Inquisitor of Hogwarts. In response to Umbridge and the Ministry's refusal to teach practical defensive magic, Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley created a group of students that met secretly to learn defense against the dark arts. With Harry acting as the leader and teacher, this organization was known as Dumbledore's Army, in order to frighten the Ministry. When this illegal society was uncovered, Dumbledore willingly took the blame, pointing out that it was named Dumbledore's Army, not Potter's Army. While Fudge ordered his arrest, Dumbledore stated that he would not come quietly and easily overpowered his would-be captors with a single spell and went underground, working to aid the Order full-time. In Dumbledore's stead, Umbridge was named Headmistress of Hogwarts and took full advantage of her position and authority over students and staff alike. Duel with Lord Voldemort. Main article, Battle of the Department of Mysteries. Albus Dumbledore. It was foolish to come here tonight, Tom. The Aurors are on their way. Voldemort, by which time I shall be gone, and you dead. Dumbledore and Voldemort preparing to duel. Yes. Unfortunately, as Dumbledore had feared, Voldemort finally acted to use the connection between himself and Harry Potter. Using legilimency, Voldemort created a vision that indicated that his beloved godfather Sirius Black had been captured by Voldemort personally and was being tortured by him within the Department of Mysteries. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood, and Neville Longbottom all rushed to the Ministry in the hopes of saving Sirius. However, the 6 students were ambushed by a group of Death Eaters who hoped to force Harry to recover the record of the prophecy made about him and the Dark Lord. Voldemort perceived that it was too dangerous to enter the heart of the Ministry of Magic himself. Fortunately, Severus Snape was able to alert the Order to this, and several members arrived in the Ministry where they battled with the Death Eaters. Near the end of the battle, Dumbledore himself arrived and swiftly captured all the Death Eaters personally, except Bellatrix Lestrange, who murdered Sirius and evaded a spell cast at her by the revered wizard. After binding the Death Eaters with an anti-disapparition jinx, Dumbledore went to the atrium of the Ministry where Lestrange had been joined by Voldemort himself, who attempted to kill Harry. Voldemort's curse, however, was prevented. Dumbledore quickly animated a golden statue to cover Harry and shield him from the curse. He animated the other statues from the Fountain of Magical Brethren to immobilize Bellatrix and alert Ministry officials. With Voldemort having arrived in the Ministry, Dumbledore took this chance to give undeniable evidence that the Dark Lord truly had returned and fought him both to protect Harry and hold him at bay. Dumbledore displayed his extraordinary magical capabilities as he calmly countered or dodged Voldemort's attacks and returned with his own assault that steadily forced Voldemort to go on the defensive. Yet Dumbledore was not fighting to kill, a fact which surprised Voldemort. Soon enough, Dumbledore managed to trap the Dark Lord within an orb of water just after having been saved by Fawkes, who intercepted a killing curse Voldemort had shot at Dumbledore. while the latter was countering the strike of a fiery serpent that Voldemort had conjured. Though Dumbledore had failed to capture or defeat Voldemort, the Dark Lord realized himself that he could not overpower his former teacher, and so abandoned his effort and disapparated. Before Voldemort fled the Ministry, however, he briefly possessed Harry, hoping that Dumbledore would sacrifice the teenager in an attempt to kill him. However, Dumbledore did not take the bait as he cared for Harry too much to do it. Fortunately, Dumbledore did not have to resort to whatever means he would have needed to remove Voldemort from Harry himself, as the tremendous power of Harry's love dwelt on his grief for his late godfather, inflicted great pain upon Voldemort, and the Dark Lord was forced to remove himself and block his connection. With his failure to retrieve the prophecy and his attempt on Harry's life foiled, Voldemort fled the Ministry with Bellatrix, but not before he was seen by Ministry officials, including Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge. With Dumbledore's credibility realized once more, Fudge's was permanently lost. Henceforth, Dumbledore successfully ensured that Fudge removed Umbridge, pardoned Hagrid so he could return to Hogwarts, and he himself would be reinstated as headmaster. Once he was back at Hogwarts, Dumbledore consulted with a distraught Harry. After all the stress and pain that was put on the 15-year-old's shoulders for an entire year, coupled with the loss of his godfather, Harry finally snapped and began destroying Dumbledore's possessions in an incredible rage. However, Dumbledore calmly leveled with the boy, freely admitting that Harry had every right to be angry with him, and if anything he should have been far angrier at him. He acknowledged that Sirius's death was his fault, and that if Harry let him explain, the boy would be free to rage and storm at him, even attack him if he chose to. Managing to appease Harry, he began explaining the meaning of his connection with Voldemort and asserting the meaning of the prophecy. Before the end of the year, he also had the Inquisitorial Squad disbanded and reverted any damage they did. During the summer of 1996, Dumbledore tracked one of Voldemort's Horcruxes to the House of the Gaunts. Dumbledore journeyed to Little Hangleton, where he found the remains of the shack hidden behind weeds, and Voldemort had placed many powerful enchantments around the former home of his ancestors. However, Dumbledore proved skillful enough to pass through them unharmed. When he found the Horcrux, a ring formerly owned by Marvolo Gaunt, he saw that the stone in the ring was one of the Deathly Hallows, the Resurrection Stone. This stone, according to legend, had the power to revive the dead, but in reality a spiritual form of the person was brought back instead, much like an echo. His desire to see his family overrode his common sense for just a moment, and he placed the ring on his finger, forgetting that the ring had been cursed by Voldemort. The curse quickly spread, and were it not for his own prodigious talents, he would have died within moments. Despite this injury, Dumbledore proceeded to destroy the ring, and with it, a piece of Voldemort's soul, bringing Voldemort that much closer to defeat. Dumbledore quickly returned to Hogwarts, where the skills of Severus Snape managed to trap the curse in Dumbledore's hand. However, both Snape and Dumbledore knew that it would eventually spread to the rest of his body. Knowing that the curse would kill him, Dumbledore asked Snape that when the time came that he be the one to end Dumbledore's life rather than Draco Malfoy. Malfoy had been given the task of assassinating the headmaster in order to spare Draco's soul from being torn. Snape had to be the one to carry it out. Snape later objected to the plan but was reminded by Dumbledore that it was the only way to spare him from great suffering. During this time, Dumbledore also shared his insights on Voldemort with Harry by showing him the various memories he had collected, giving Harry a greater knowledge of Voldemort's psychology that would help him in his future conflicts. Throughout the 1996-1997 school year, Dumbledore passed on certain pieces of information to Harry Potter that would be important for the boy in his quest to destroy the Dark Lord. Dumbledore held private lessons with Harry, revealing in them much of what he had learnt about Voldemort's past life and Horcruxes. Dumbledore revealed to Harry that he made it his business to try and find out about Lord Voldemort's past. He did this by questioning people who had known him as a child and a teenager and obtained Voldemort-related memories from them. He collected memories from Bob Ogden, Morphine Gaunt, Horace Slughorn, and the house elf Hokey. Using these memories along with some of his own, he discovered that Voldemort had created 6 Horcruxes, an unheard-of event, been guilty of murders that he framed others for, and also figured out what the Horcruxes could be based on Voldemort's ego and his long interest in Hogwarts. Tom Riddle's diary, Gaunt's ring, Hufflepuff's cup, Slytherin's locket, Nagini, and an object of Rowena Ravenclaw's later revealed to be her lost diadem. They dismissed the idea of a Gryffindor artifact as unlikely, as only the sorting hat and the sword of Gryffindor remained as items from Gryffindor himself, and Voldemort did not have access to them. After much searching, Dumbledore eventually tracked another of Voldemort's Horcruxes to a cave that as a young Warden he had once visited. As he had promised, Dumbledore allowed Harry Potter to accompany him to the cave and help destroy the Horcrux. Setting off from Hogwarts on an evening in late June 1997, he and Harry apparated to just outside the cave, being unable to enter directly due to its protective enchantment. Once inside, Dumbledore located the Horcrux's second line of defense, a hidden doorway which only opened when it received an offering of blood. They next found themselves in a vast chamber containing an underground lake, with a solitary island at its center from which a faint green light was visible. After a failed attempt by Harry at summoning the Horcrux, Dumbledore located a carefully concealed boat that would allow them safe passage across the lake. During the crossing, Harry learned of the Horcrux's third line of defense. The lake was filled with Inferi, which would attack anyone who touched the lake's water. Dumbledore instructed Harry on the use of fire as the weapon of choice against the Inferi, should it become necessary. Arriving at the small island, they found a basin filled with glowing green potion. This last defense could not be removed by vanishing it or scooping it out. Someone would have to drink it to get to the Horcrux that lay within. Dumbledore ordered Harry to help him drink all of the potion, no matter what effects it caused, even if Harry had to force it down Dumbledore's throat. Dumbledore drank, and he saw a vision of the duel between him, Gellert Grindelwald, and Aberforth, Dumbledore, and Ariana's death. The drink also was weakening him and made him extremely thirsty as well and caused him great pain. The whole purpose of the potion, he couldn't bear it. But Harry succeeded at getting it down his throat by telling him it would be over soon. On his last drink, he fell unconscious. After a failed attempt by Harry to revive him with Renovate, Dumbledore woke up after his period of unconsciousness, wanting water. Harry then attempted to summon water for Dumbledore with the water-making spell, but this proved ineffective as the cavern was enchanted to vanish. Summoned water. In desperation, Harry filled a cup with water from the lake. Harry was only able to tip the water over Dumbledore's face before the Inferi climbed up out of the lake and attacked them. Harry panicked and attempted to fight back with a multitude of spells and curses, including the Impediment Jinx and Sectum Semper curse, but none of them worked since the Inferi were too numerous and had no blood to spill. Dumbledore, having regained consciousness, created a ring of fire around them that repelled the Inferi, driving them back into the lake while he and Harry escaped in the boat with the Horcrux. Harry used a small cut on his arm to reopen the hidden doorway, and once outside the cave they disapparated back to Hogsmeade. They would find no rest there, however, as the Battle of the Astronomy Tower had already begun. Harry and Dumbledore took brooms from behind Madame Rosmerta's bar and flew to the Astronomy Tower. Once at the Astronomy Tower, Dumbledore and an invisibility-cloaked Harry were confronted by Draco Malfoy. Before Harry could reveal himself, Dumbledore immobilized him with a silent full-body bind curse, making it so he could only watch the upcoming event. Malfoy disarmed Dumbledore and admitted that he, Draco, was behind the series of attacks on Hogwarts students. and that Voldemort had ordered him to kill Dumbledore. Dumbledore revealed that he knew of Draco's mission and of the attempts on his life with the opal necklace and poisoned mead, but allowed him to remain in Hogwarts for knowing Voldemort would kill him if he was exposed and expelled. Dumbledore offered Draco protection and promised to hide Draco and his mother where Voldemort would never find them. Draco ultimately could not bring himself to kill the headmaster, even after the arrival and encouragement of several Death Eaters who were smuggled into the castle by Draco. However, Snape, who had been called by Phineas Flitwick to assist the Order of the Phoenix sometime previously, arrived at the tower, and, after Dumbledore pleaded with him in a way that did not expose Snape's true intentions, killed the headmaster, blasting his body off the tower and falling to the ground below. A while later, after the battle was over, Harry found Dumbledore's body lying dead on the ground in front of hundreds of staring people, his body broken from the fall. Harry found the locket and read a letter written by R.A.B. and realized that it was not a Horcrux, meaning the locket was a fake. Harry neither knew nor cared what this message meant, and he felt that he and Dumbledore had accomplished nothing that night, and that the latter had weakened himself by drinking the potion for nothing. Harry started crying over Dumbledore's corpse, as well as straightening his half-moon spectacles upon his crooked nose, and Harry wiping a trickle of blood from the dead headmaster's mouth with his Harry's own sleeve. Albus Dumbledore's legacy was hugely significant and entailed by decades of suffering, torture, tragedy, success, love, prosperity, and everything in between. He was destined for glory by what he dreamed of and the aspirations he had during his youth, including what he accomplished in his early youth. Though in his youth he wanted to rule over the world of the non-magic people, he didn't do it in any bad matter like his boyfriend Gellert Grindelwald tended to. He learned early in his teenage years that power and being the best could end very badly, and was always not the best result. Though he did learn many things, for instance, he used the way he worded things for his own good, as using and manipulating people, for instance, for the greater good. Sometime in early July, a funeral was held for him, attended by Hogwarts students and staff, Ministry of Magic officials, including Cornelius Fudge, Rufus Scrimgeour, Dolores Umbridge, and Percy Weasley, Centaurs, members of the Order of the Phoenix, except Severus Snape, due to his covert status, and Mundungus Fletcher, due to his imprisonment in Azkaban. Hogsmeade residents, including Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth, Fawkes, Hagrid's half-brother, Grawp, Merpeople, Tom the landlord of the Leaky Cauldron, Madame Maxime from Beauxbaton Academy of Magic, bass player of the Weird Sisters Donahan Tremlett, driver of the night bus Ernie Prang, Madame Malkin of the Robe Shop in Diagon Alley, the lady who pushed the trolley on the Hogwarts Express, as well as many other witches and wizards. It was Dumbledore's wish to be laid to rest within Hogwarts grounds, and his supporters, friends, and colleagues ensured that his wish was carried out. Despite the fact that no other headmasters or headmistresses had ever been laid to rest at Hogwarts before, the Ministry respected Dumbledore's wishes due to his great standing in the wizarding community. During his funeral, directly after a ceremony official gave his eulogy, his body was encased in bright white flames that gave off smoke in strange patterns, and Harry Potter thought he saw the form of a phoenix fly out of the blaze. When it subsided, Dumbledore was closed in this tomb. After his death, Dumbledore's reputation was smeared somewhat by Rita Skeeter, who wrote an insulting biography called The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. This depicted him in a highly unfavorable light, including suggesting that he delayed his attack on Gellert Grindelwald because he still held lingering affection for him. In 1998, Lord Voldemort, during his search for the Elder Wand, demanded the location of the wand from Gellert Grindelwald in his cell in Nurmengard prison. Grindelwald refused to tell him anything, possibly out of a desire not to see his old friend's grave desecrated. or as a sign of remorse for all the atrocities he committed earlier in his life. However, Voldemort eventually deduced that Dumbledore had won the Elder Wand from Grindelwald, who himself stole it from Gregorovitch. Voldemort flew to Hogwarts and used his own wand to crack open the White Tomb from head to foot, and then removed the sheets from around Dumbledore's body, allowing him to take the wand within, which had been buried with its owner. He did not realize that Harry Potter had won the allegiance of the wand from Draco during a skirmish in the Malfoy Manor not long before. In Limbo.
Albus Dumbledore, Harry.
You wonderful boy. You brave, brave man. Let us walk. Harry Potter. But you're dead. Albus Dumbledore. Oh yes. Harry Potter. Then, I'm dead too. Albus Dumbledore. That is the question, isn't it? On the whole, dear boy, I think not. Dumbledore greeting Harry Potter in Limbo. S. Dumbledore, Harry Limbo. Harry Potter speaking with Albus Dumbledore in Limbo. As it turned out, the night of Dumbledore's death was not the last time Harry saw him. After finding out he was one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, Voldemort having accidentally made him one the night he tried to kill him, Harry bravely walked into Voldemort's camp to be killed, just as Dumbledore had reluctantly planned. But Voldemort's killing curse once again failed to kill Harry. Instead, Harry entered a limbo state, where he spoke with Dumbledore's spirit. Dumbledore explained to Harry everything he had not told him when he was alive, the nature of the Deathly Hallows, his friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, and a number of other things. Most significantly, he revealed that Harry was not dead because, when Voldemort had used Harry's blood to restore his body, he had unintentionally linked Harry's life to his own, with the result that Voldemort's curse had killed only the fragment of his soul that had remained in Harry all these years. Despite the anger and resentment he felt toward his old mentor, Harry also attempted to console Dumbledore when asked if he had been any better than Voldemort in his quest for power. Harry pointed out that Dumbledore had never killed if he could avoid it, and argued that Dumbledore's search for the Hallows, as opposed to any attempts to create Horcruxes, made him completely different from Voldemort, fully reconciling with his protege. After he had finished their talk, Dumbledore and Harry parted ways for the time being. Harry returned to the mortal world and Dumbledore moved, as he would put it, on. He was the only headmaster to be laid to rest on the Hogwarts grounds, after Hagrid argued that no other headmaster had ever given as much to the school as Dumbledore had. His portrait also remained at Hogwarts. After Voldemort's death and Harry revealing that he was the true master of the Elder Wand, he said to Dumbledore's portrait that he was going to return the wand to his tomb, where it would remain until he died, and should he be undefeated, he would be the wand's last master, which would break its power. He only used the wand for one feat, to repair his own wand, which had been broken earlier. Harry and Ginny Potter's second son was named Albus Severus Potter, after Dumbledore and Severus.